how often do we expect, real qualifications for tough jobs? Like, you wouldn't want an untrained pilot flying your plane, right?
Absolutely not. Or someone without medical training doing surgery.
Exactly. But then, for the people who govern us, who make huge decisions, well, the bar often seems much lower. It's a weird disconnect, isn't it?
It really is.
So today, we're diving deep into a proposal that tackles this head-on. It asks this really provocative question. What if you actually needed a license to govern?
Intriguing.
Yeah, it's a fascinating concept for civic reform. It comes from Dr. Lev Neymotin, and it's laid out as a legislative roadmap. We've got two key documents we're looking at. First, his main white paper, License to Govern. That one sort of lays out the big idea, the why.
The justification for it all.
Right. But our main focus today, and what's really detailed in the second document, LTG legislature.pdf, is the how. The practical steps, the legal stuff, the constitutional hurdles, basically the roadmap to potentially make this happen.
Gotcha. So we're looking at the vision, sure, but really digging into the implementation plan.
That's right. Our goal here is to understand this Certificate of Training and Governance, the CTG, and crucially, explore the concrete strategies Dr. Neymotin proposes to roll this out. Federal, state, local levels. It's complex.
It sounds it, especially navigating the Constitution.
Oh, definitely. We'll unpack those constitutional issues, the strategic thinking, and, the core rationale behind it all.
Okay, so let's start briefly with the big picture idea itself. What is this License to Govern, or LTG, and this Certificate of Training, the CTG?
Well, at its core, the LTG proposal calls for a mandatory certificate of training and governance, basically for anyone aiming for public office.
Anyone. Elected, appointed.
Yeah, elected, selected, appointed. That's the idea. It's about setting a baseline, ensuring some fundamental knowledge before someone gets into a position of, significant power.
And that analogy you mentioned earlier from the white paper about the pilot and the surgeon, it's pretty powerful. It is. Dr. Neymotin asks directly, would you trust an unlicensed pilot? Or let someone untrained perform surgery? It forces you to confront that question. Why do we accept less rigor, less proven competence for governing?
It really does make you stop and think.
Yeah. And his diagnosis of the problem, laid out in that foundational white paper, is pretty blunt. He says, incompetent governance is not a partisan issue. It is a systemic failure.
Systemic.
Right. He does mention specific examples, figures like AOC, the Squad, Madani. But he frames it not as a partisan jab, but to illustrate a perceived lack of civic qualification that he argues applies equally to, quote, demagogues of all stripes.
So trying to stay nonpartisan about the problem itself.
Exactly. And crucially, he insists the proposal itself must be free from partisan indoctrination or bureaucratic gatekeeping. It's meant to be about core knowledge, not ideology.
Okay, so if it's about core knowledge, what kind of things would be in the CTG? What's the curriculum look like?
It seems pretty comprehensive based on the white paper. There's a foundational module on the U.S. Constitution and civic structure, not just theory, but practical application, federalism, checks and balances.
The essentials.
Right. Then, public finance and budgeting, super important. Ethics and law, covering codes of conduct, campaign finance rules, governance in practice, which includes things like crisis management, how regulatory systems work.
Practical stuff.
Yeah, and also communications, media, and civic engagement. It apparently culminates in a capstone project, like designing a mock governance program. And there's even mention of an intensive 2-week boot camp option.
Wow, okay. That's a lot. But the big question, the one you immediately think of, is how do you stop this becoming, a political tool, a way to filter out people you don't like?
Totally valid concern. And the proposal seems very aware of that risk. It outlines several safeguards.
Like what?
Well, first, independent oversight. They propose a board of retired judges, constitutional scholars explicitly across the spectrum, and even randomly selected citizens, designed to be apolitical. Second, transparency. All the course materials, the tests, the grading guides, everything has to be public. No secret criteria.
Public access.
Yes, third point, public access. The courses, the boot camps, they have to be free, online, available to everyone, lowering barriers to entry.
And if someone fails or feels unfairly treated?
There's a clear appeals process built in. For due process, accountability. The whole vision is framed as a baseline clearance, like a license, focused on integrity, not conformity. He even calls it a rescue mission for a republic at risk of incompetence.
Strong words. Okay, so that's the vision, the why. But now let's really shift gears and get into the legislative roadmap document, the LTG legislature.pdf. This is where we get into the how, moving from the idea to the messy reality of making it happen, especially with the Constitution in the mix.
Exactly. And this document dives right into the constitutional analysis because that really dictates the strategy. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach for federal, state, and local.
So let's start at the top, the federal level. What are the constitutional roadblocks there?
Big ones. The U.S. Constitution sets out very specific and, importantly, minimal qualifications for a president, senator, representative, age, citizenship, residency. That's basically it.
And you can't just add more requirements.
That's the kicker. The Supreme Court case, U.S. Term Limits v. Thornton back in '95, was crucial. It essentially said states cannot impose additional qualifications for federal office beyond what the Constitution lays out. And neither can Congress, actually.
So what does that mean for a mandatory CTG for, say, someone running for Congress or president?
It means you can't do it through a simple law, whether federal or state.
Yep.
It would require a constitutional amendment.
Wow. Okay, that is a huge hurdle. A constitutional amendment is incredibly difficult to pass.
Monumental. The roadmap acknowledges this. So the strategy for federal elected office isn't to push for mandatory CTG right away.
What then?
The guidance suggests starting with voluntary CTG programs. The idea is to build demand and acceptance, offer incentives, maybe party endorsements, better placement in debates, access to resources for candidates who choose to get the certificate.
Normalize it first.
Exactly. Normalize the expectation, show its value, build public support over the long haul before even attempting the incredibly heavy lift of an amendment. It's positioned as a long game for federal elected roles.
Okay, so federal elected office is tough. What about the states? Is there more wiggle room there?
Yes, significantly more. States have much greater autonomy when it comes to setting qualifications for their own state and local offices, governors, state legislators, mayors, etc.
Many already have extra rules, right? Like longer residency or no felony convictions.
Precisely. So this is where the roadmap sees a major opportunity. States can potentially enact laws requiring training or certification, especially for appointed officials and civil servants. Think about it. We already require training and certification for police, teachers, even many administrative roles.
That's true. It's already common practice in many areas.
Right. So extending a CTG requirement to appointed state roles or embedding it in civil service standards is much more legally feasible. For elected state roles, making it mandatory might still face some state constitutional challenges depending on the state, but states could definitely offer strong incentives.
Incentives like?
Things like giving candidates who voluntarily complete the CTG better ballot placement, maybe highlighting it in official voter guides, potentially even linking it to eligibility for public campaign financing where that exists.
So make it advantageous to have it, even if it's not strictly required initially.
Exactly. The roadmap identifies states as key battlegrounds for implementation. The strategy involves drafting model legislation states can adapt, pushing for pilot programs maybe starting as opt-in and phasing in mandatory requirements first for appointed officials, using that success to build support for elected positions.
Okay, that sounds more achievable. And then what about the local level? Cities, towns, the roadmap calls this the lowest hanging fruit.
Yeah, that seems to be the assessment. Municipalities generally have the most flexibility. They operate under state laws and local charters, but within those, they can often set their own standards for local governance.
So how could a city adopt CTC?
Several ways. They could pass local ordinances requiring CTG training for their own elected officials, like city council members or school board members, and certainly for their appointed department heads or staff. It could be bundled into broader ethics reform packages, or, in some cases, citizens could push for charter amendments to make it a formal requirement.
So cities could become testing grounds, essentially.
Precisely. The idea is that cities and towns can serve as demonstration projects. They can pilot CTG programs, show the benefits, hopefully, improve governance, more trust, and build momentum from the ground up. The strategy suggests partnering directly with reform-minded mayors and councils to get these pilots running and promote them as models for other cities and even states.
It really paints a picture of a multi-level strategy, starting where it's easiest and building up. So looking at this whole roadmap, how does Dr. Neymotin envision coordinating all this? It sounds like a massive long-term undertaking.
It absolutely is. The roadmap lays out distinct phases. It starts with a development phase. This involves not just drafting model laws for different levels because one size won't fit all, but also bringing in constitutional experts to make sure the proposals are legally sound from the start. A key piece here is creating that independent, bipartisan CTG board of standards to actually develop the curriculum and tests. And as we said, launching pilot programs.
Get the foundation right first.
Exactly. Then comes a major public advocacy phase. This isn't just about lobbying. It's described as a values-driven campaign. Think clear messaging, like, shouldn't leaders know how government works, or no one should govern without training? The plan involves building broad coalitions, veterans groups, educators, business leaders, civic tech people, partnering with think tanks across the spectrum, like Brookings and Heritage is mentioned, plus groups like Civic Nation to lend credibility and reach.
Building public buy-in.
Crucial. Then you move into the legislative phase, but with that strategic focus, state and local first. Introduce bills in receptive states, maybe tie CTG to popular issues like ethics reform. Use those incentives we talked about, campaign finance links, ballot prominence, and encourage cities to adopt it locally.
And the federal piece.
It runs on parallel tracks. For appointed federal jobs, the roadmap suggests Congress or the president could require CTG through legislation or executive order. For the vast federal civil service, the Office of Personnel Management, OPM, could integrate CTG into its hiring and training frameworks. But for elected federal office holders.
Back to the constitutional amendment.
Right. Acknowledged as a long-term process. It means years, maybe decades, of building consensus across states to even get an amendment proposed, let alone ratified. And finally, woven through all of this is the expectation of legal review and court challenges. The roadmap stresses needing to be ready to defend CTG in court, arguing it's a reasonable, non-discriminatory educational requirement, kind of like a bar exam for lawyers, not a political litmus test. Building in due process and appeals is key to surviving those challenges.
It really does sound like building a whole new piece of civic infrastructure. It would take so many different groups working together. Who are the key players identified in making something like this happen?
It's a broad network. Obviously, state legislatures are central for state-level laws. City councils and mayors are vital for local adoption and those pilot programs. On the federal side, executive branch agencies and OPM are key for appointed officials and civil servants. The courts inevitably will play a role in interpreting legality.
And outside government.
The independent CTG Board of Standards is critical for legitimacy and quality control. Universities and law schools would likely be involved in developing and delivering the training. Civic organizations are needed to mobilize public support. And the roadmap also mentions media and public figures as important for shaping the narrative and building awareness. It really takes a village, so to speak.
So let's bring this back to our listener. We've gone through the concept, the curriculum, the huge constitutional hurdles, the phased rollout plan. Why should someone listening right now actually care about this proposal? What's the relevance?
Well, I think it boils down to trust and effectiveness in government. This whole initiative, at its heart, seems to be about trying to restore competence and maybe some baseline level of functionality to our civic institutions. It's arguing that we need assurance that the people given power actually understand the system they're operating in, its rules, its responsibilities, its ethical boundaries.
So it's about better government performance.
Partly, yes, but maybe more fundamentally, it's about ensuring public servants are viewed as, and actually are, competent stewards of public trust. Whether that impacts your local services, state policies, or national direction, the argument is that having verifiably knowledgeable people in charge should lead to better outcomes and perhaps less cynicism about the whole process.
And that core analogy keeps coming back. The author wants CTG to become as normal as a driver's license.
Exactly. A basic expectation, a sort of civic contract between the leaders and the led.
So we've really dug into Dr. Lev Neymotin's license to govern idea today, especially focusing on that detailed legislative roadmap from the LTG legislature.pdf. We've seen the vision for more knowledgeable, competent leadership, but also the really complex, challenging path to potentially making it real, navigating everything from local city ordinances right up to the U.S. Constitution.
Yeah, it's a concept that definitely forces us to question some basic assumptions, doesn't it? About who gets to lead and how we ensure they're prepared for the job. It's presented not just as a policy tweak, but as a fundamental civic infrastructure project aimed at building competence right into the system, starting locally and working upwards.
So maybe the final thought for you, the listener, is this. How different would our politics, our democracy feel if a baseline level of civic knowledge wasn't just hoped for, but actually required for holding office? What if we really did approach qualifying someone to govern with the same seriousness we apply to qualifying someone to fly a plane or perform surgery?
It's definitely something to think about.
We encourage you to chew on these ideas. Consider what a system like this might mean, the pros, the cons, the practicalities for the future of how we're governed, and the trust we place in those leaders.